Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's introduction to the Business Administrator Level 3 Assessment Plan update. My name's Dom Green. I'm the Technical Advisor for Business Skills at City & Guilds. I'm joined today by three of my colleagues. Mandy Slaney, Lead Industry Manager for Business Skills.
Morning.
Judy Polisano, Development Manager at City & Guilds.
Good morning.
And Laura Harrop, one of our business development managers who covers Yorkshire and the North East.
Morning.
So we just thought we'd be a little bit more personal this morning, show our photographs and say hello. Just to save bandwidth, we will stop the photographs now. Okay, so just to remind everybody that we all obviously are working from home, different parts of the country, etc. What we're going to do today is run through the, first of all, why we're hosting this webinar, look at the current assessment plan before moving on to look at the new assessment plan, some documentation and resources which we'll have a quick look at, as well as quality assurance and some lead independent endpoint assessment feedback as well from the LEPA report. Laura's going to give us a very brief overview of our new platform, EPA Pro, before a quick summary as to what's changed, followed by Q&A. Now, if you do have any questions to ask, please do type them in the question pane, which you should be able to see normally on the right-hand side of your screen, and at the very end of the webinar, we'll take a look at those. Where we can answer them all, what we will do is take them away and create a frequently asked questions sheet, and we will upload them to the website. Before we begin, just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will automatically be sent to you no later than tomorrow. So you should get a thank you email to say thanks for attending, along with a copy of the recording. You will also get a copy of a survey which should take you about 1 minute to complete. This also incorporates a couple of questions about your registration numbers, so we'd really appreciate just 1 minute of your time. If you could follow up on that, that would be fantastic. We do have a lot of people signed up today, so fingers crossed that the bandwidth stays strong. Okay. Why are we hosting this webinar then? Well, as many of you will already know, IFATE recently released a new assessment plan for this particular business administrator standard. The new assessment plan is now called AP03, and you can always check really what version that you're working from. The top right of the document highlights it, so you can see there on the screenshot as a big arrow to the number associated to each assessment plan. This particular assessment plan is labelled ST0070, but the important bit is the AP03, essentially assessment plan 3. So the question is, who does this assessment plan impact? Well, AP03 should be followed by all learners who are registered from the 10th of September 2020 onwards. We refer to learners who registered from the 10th of September with regard to their ILR start date, not necessarily when you registered the learner with City & Guilds. So just to confirm, this does not affect learners registered prior to the 10th of September. It only impacts learners who have an ILR start date of the 10th of September onwards. Some of you will be aware that unfortunately this particular webinar has been postponed twice, and no doubt to many people's frustrations. Once again, we apologise for this, but there is method in our madness. When the assessment plan was first released, City & Guilds, along with many other EPAOs, wanted to challenge some of the content, and so push back to the Institute for Apprenticeships. This, of course, meant that things were constantly changing, and we felt that until we'd got more of a fixed outline on what we're working with, we actually might have been detrimental to you and everybody else if we continuously updated you every month on where we were at. It would probably only be quite confusing. So for that reason, really, we made the decision to reschedule. Some of you will be aware that we actually rescheduled it for Christmas Day, just for a holding date, really. So here we are. We still can't promise really all the answers at this stage, but just to let you know that we will be following this webinar up with a follow-on webinar around March time. Okay, so what I want to do now is briefly look at the assessment methods for a quick recap on the current assessment plan that the majority of you will be using now. So the assessment methods consist of an online multiple choice test, the portfolio-based interview, and the project-based presentation as the three components. And really to take note there that the knowledge test ideally should be completed first. Both the portfolio-based interview and that project-based presentation will be conducted remotely via our GoToMeeting platform. So a little bit of an insight then onto the knowledge test. The knowledge test is completed via our Evolve platform, and of course will require invigilating like any other exam does. It lasts for a maximum of 60 minutes and consists of 50 equally weighted questions, which are all multiple choice questions and will consist of 4 possible answers. So the knowledge test assesses the knowledge and skills of the standard of the assessment plan, highlights what's to be covered. The focus is specifically on non-organisation specific knowledge outlined in the standard, such as relevant regulations and laws, business fundamentals, project management principles. The assessment plan states that the knowledge test should typically be passed before the apprentice progresses to the next stage of endpoint assessment, where the portfolio-based interview and project presentation is assessed. To support the apprentice, we do have a sample test which is available. It sits on both our website and smart screen platforms. We've also got the endpoint assessment handbook, which is directly associated to supporting those learners through the knowledge test. That's also found on the website. So please do remember then that the knowledge test cannot be sat by the apprentice until they've successfully gone through Gateway, and that the Evolve test can't be sat immediately, as there is a 5-day wait time to ensure that the learner has been on programme for a sufficient period of 366 days. So the portfolio-based interview. The portfolio of evidence is gathered during the on-programme and should be completed prior to Gateway. It's currently submitted to us no later than 2 weeks prior to endpoint assessment. And the portfolio itself should provide at least one piece of evidence for each of the minimum knowledge, skills and behaviours outlined in the assessment methods and grading annex table. Evidence for that portfolio is gathered on programme, and the employer should facilitate this through relevant tasks and support. The training provider, college, should support where needed, and the employer and training provider or college should review the portfolio with the apprentice and make a judgment on whether they should be progressed to endpoint assessment. The evidence of that work gathered on programme should be the apprentice's best pieces of work and should be as holistic as possible. And the portfolio should be a minimum of 8 pages and a recommended maximum of 25 pages. What's important to note is that in the assessment plan, not the new assessment plan, this is the old one that the majority of you currently working towards, is that the method of assessment carries a 40% weighting. All the evidence submitted must be referenced to the portfolio KSBS using the recording form, otherwise known as the matrix, and that can be found on our website in the recording form presenters document shown in the screenshot there. So briefly onto the project-based presentation then. The project requires a presentation, and we recommend that that's backed up by a report style document consisting of between 2,000 and 5,000 words. The presentation should include the aim, the outcome and the responsibilities so that the KSBs are shown. The presentation should last between 10 to 15 minutes and will immediately be followed by a Q&A session lasting the same duration. The presentation should be produced on either PowerPoint or Prezi as per the assessment plan. The project itself should account for 21 to 35 working hours and should be work-based. So that for me is the equivalent to a working week. We all wish we had a working week of 35 working hours, but Generally, for an apprentice, 21 to 35 working hours. The project should last for the equivalent of a full working week. The report about the project should incorporate scoping, planning, managing, communicating to stakeholders, and monitoring and the reporting of those results. The assessment plan states that the project cannot be started until month 9 of the apprentices on programme, so please do bear that in mind. Okay, it's wise then that the apprentice chooses the project or improvement process with support and guidance from the training provider and their employer, just to make sure that the type of evidence will naturally map across to the KSBs it needs to hit. Once again, for those learners on assessment plan 1, the project carries a weighting of 40%. Okay, what I'm going to do now is pass to Mandy to give an overview of the new AP03.
Thank you, Don. So now looking at the new assessment plan. So, I mean, the good news really is that the KSBs have not changed. The standard hasn't changed. So hopefully that should put a lot of people at ease as in delivery currently. So this shouldn't impact your on-programme learning or your resources, so you can carry on with the on-programme as you are. As Dom said earlier, this will impact all learners that started from the 10th of September onwards. We will be introducing a new programme of study number, so 9473, as you know it now, 12 will be 9473, 22 will be the new assessment plan code for your registrations. This will go live from the 12th of February. So all your new learners on your new plan, you need to register, make sure you register on the right number. What we're actually looking at currently is for them learners that have actually been registered before. So we will be making contact with you to identify which learners will need actually switching across onto the new registration number. Thanks, Dom. Okay, so let's look at the changes in more detail. So really there's 7 primary adjustments to the assessment plan. 2 iterations in 2 months, which I'll cover on the next slide. The weighting and the grading, I mean, they're the key areas that where the changes and the impacts on the learners and also the assessment process. Juice is going to go into that in more detail later on. Also, the mapping of the KSBs, they have changed. And you can see, if you've looked at the new plan, that they're slightly aligned differently. But also, the key sort of change really is around the language. So you'll see that there's and or rather than the, you know, how it currently was. Project question. So again, we'll cover that later on. But basically, what we'll do is you will be asked a question for the learner once you've submitted Gateway. So once a project has been submitted, the assessor will then come back to the centre with a question that the learner needs to cover within the presentation. Resits, retakes and capping changes, and also invigilation. So the 2 iterations, what many of you may have noticed was that there was another plan actually launched in July, which became version 2. However, due to the feedback from ourselves, the EPAOs and other stakeholders and lots of concerns raised really, it was decided that that plan would no longer go forward. So that was replaced then by the version 3, which is the current plan that everybody should be working towards for the new learners. And now over to the weighting and grading, which is the key areas I mentioned earlier. I'm now going to hand over to Juicy.
Thank you, Mandy. I hope you can hear me because I'm having some trouble this morning with the connection, but hopefully we will be okay. So in terms of weighting, As you might remember, in the previous assessment plan, AP02, each assessment method had different weighting contribution towards the overall grade. The knowledge test before had a 20% contribution, and the portfolio-based interview and the project improvement presentation had 40% contribution towards the overall grade. Now, with the AP03, the new assessment plan, towards the overall grade. If we can move to the next slide.
Sorry, Josie, can you just do the last 5 seconds again? We lost you for a little bit. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah, you just dropped off after you finished off the 40% for the AP02.
Okay, so basically with the new assessment plan, each assessment method will have equal weighting. So it's 33% each contribution towards the overall grade. So it's a lot more balanced in terms of contribution, more equal. Have you heard that? Yes?
That's fine, Josie.
Thank you. Okay, in terms of grading, the knowledge test remain the same. We still have 50 questions in total, and the time allowance for the test is exactly the same. The contribution, in terms of pass and distinction, they still need to have 30 questions correct out of 50 in order to get pass. And apprentices will need to have 40 questions correct out of 50 to achieve a distinction. So the grade boundaries for the knowledge test has not changed. We are obviously in the process of reviewing the content of the bank of questions to make sure they are current and fit for purpose, but the content in terms of modules has not changed.
We've lost you again, Josie.
Have you lost me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
You're back now.
So, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear now, Josie.
Sorry, apologies, I'm having problems. So in terms of the portfolio and the project, the grading descriptors have not changed. However, in order to get a pass in each assessment method, all the pass criteria will need to be met. And in order to get a distinction, all the distinction criteria will need to be met. So with this new assessment plan, a lot more work, or a bit more work, is required for the apprentices because there is a 100% requirement for each assessment method. So I think it's important to note that there are some modules where the apprentices struggle to meet the pass and distinction criteria. For example, stakeholder management or relevant regulation, where not only knowledge is required, but application as well. So it's so important that you do have a look at the LEPA report that do highlight areas of good performance, as well as areas that required a bit more work or areas that required improvement for.
We've lost you, Josie. Tom, do you want to? It might be better if you just pick it up.
Sure. So what we'll have is further information on that in our next follow-up webinar in March. Okay, so like Josie was saying before, in order to achieve that pass and distinction, you can see there that an outline grading table there. In order to achieve a pass, you must achieve a pass in all key areas. But what's important really is the bottom table there. In order to bottom line, sorry. In order to achieve a distinction, you must have a distinction in the knowledge test, the project presentation, and the portfolio interview. Previously, in what we refer to as AP01 or the previous assessment plan, that wasn't necessarily the case. You could have rolled up because of the weightings. However, the new AP03 does require distinctions across the board and for all the criteria to be met in all three methods of assessment. Okay, so for those of you with a keen eye, you may have noticed in AP03 as well the wording. So we mentioned before about the mapping of the knowledge, skills and behaviour in the assessment plan 3. Previously, instead of or and, it did have actually a slash. So some of the examples was in that it would say the knowledge test and the project, or knowledge test and portfolio, or portfolio and project, for instance. This did lead to confusion, and the interpretation in that it could be either or for one of the assessment methods was actually incorrect. It should have actually been both assessment methods in which this particular area was assessed, and so the language has changed somewhat in the new assessment plan. So it now includes variations, so that it says portfolio interview or project presentation or knowledge test, etc., etc. The portfolio interview or project presentation and may also be demonstrated in the knowledge test, so we've got to make sure we've kept an eye out for that. Now, this is a little bit confusing bit, because the portfolio interview and project presentation is weighted 33% each. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that where it says or and, it could be that one was actually more heavily weighted in the end, but there must remain a 50% split. And what I mean by that is half the where it says or must be in either the portfolio and the project, even though they have a 33% weighted grading split. Now that is a little bit confusing because we're using different percentages, but essentially what we will do as an EPAO is move those around so that they are equally demonstrated, evidenced, whatever you want to call it, in either or the portfolio or the project. What we'll do is we'll provide further guidance in March around that, because we should be further on with the planning to give you a little bit more information. And you can see there that this is a prime example of the change within the Annex table. So this is from the new AP03. Portfolio interview or project presentation and may also be demonstrated in the knowledge test. So for instance, specifically stakeholder management principles. So we need to be careful of the wording and where it's going to be assessed. Okay, so other changes then include the project improvement presentation question. The project is submitted to us at Gateway, and where the change will happen here from AP01 is that we'll provide you now as an EPAO with a question to answer on the presentation after Gateway has been passed. So that question, for example, could be, how have you improved a process or operating practice? What were the steps you took to implement the project? What worked well, and how would you improve the results in future? And that would be added to that presentation so that the learner has, the apprentice has something to answer within their presentation. Okay, there are some further changes in resits, retakes and capping. So apprentices who fail one or more assessment method will be offered the opportunity to take a resit or a retake, and that's at the employer's discretion. The apprentice's employer will need to agree that either a resit or retake is an appropriate course of action. A maximum of 2 resits is allowed, then a retake must occur. The rationale for that is that an apprentice must need further training if they have failed on 2 occasions. A resit does not require further learning, whereas a retake does. Apprentices should also have a supportive action plan in place to prepare for a resit or a retake, ensuring that they aren't put in at the earliest opportunity. With regard to capping, there is no guidance in the assessment plan around this. However, EQAP have recommended that no capping is to take place, which basically means that the apprentices will still have a chance to achieve a distinction if a resit or retake is required. However, resits and retakes are not offered to apprentices wishing to move from a pass to a higher grade. So the apprentices can't do a resit or a retake in order to upskill their grade from a pass to a distinction. The guidance around invigilation has also changed as well. So IFADs are clear that it remains the responsibility of the EPAO to ensure that appropriate invigilation of that knowledge test is carried out. It doesn't mean that an EPAO has to invigilate, but it does mean that all EPAOs should have a clear procedure on the invigilation policies. And we will again have further details to share on this in our March webinar as we work towards releasing the more granular detail around that. But just to note really that this will not impact any of your learners until approximately probably mid-September 2021, as the test can't be completed until Gateway has successfully been passed. So if you have a learner starting on even at the earliest stage of say mid-September, 11th of September, their on program would run for 366 days. So by the time you're coming across the knowledge test, you are looking at October time anyway, realistically. Okay, so EPA documents. Our new updated EPA assessment pack and recording forms will be available shortly. It's an update, will be an updated version which will be aligned to AP03. Please make sure that you are working from the correct assessment plan. It does sound obvious, but the newest version of AP03 can be downloaded from the IFAT website for those learners who have obviously that start date of the 10th September onwards. For those that were registered before with an ILR start date of before 10th September, just to recap, you are still working from the current assessment plan, AP01, remembering that AP02 was scrapped. And just as a reminder really that we've also got on our website the endpoint assessment handbook that I mentioned previously, which sets out that content that needs to be taught to prepare apprentices for the knowledge test component of the endpoint assessment, as well as the endpoint assessment pack as well. So other resources that we've got, those invaluable resources really available in the form of exemplar material, which gives advice and guidance around the 3 components, including what to expect from the project presentation, transcripts, for example, of EPAs, and a few others. Once again, just a reminder really about the EPA handbook to support with the knowledge test, because that is vital. And of course, you can see a screenshot there of the lead independent endpoint assessors report. Now, what I have done is pick out some of the key areas of that lead independent endpoint assessors report, so we can look at it now with regard to AP01. So I've screenshot some of the key areas from that report. The IEPAs then are generally finding that the best portfolios consist of one clearly labelled document which keeps to the maximum of that 25 pages, and where all of the KSBs have been mapped to the grading criteria table. The areas of improvement which need to be addressed are in the following areas: a lack of preparation, so being able to talk about the more complex concepts and vocabulary within the standard, particularly what I've highlighted there: legislation, internal policies, and environmental factors. It'd be good practice to ensure that learners can relate to these areas in the mock interviews that you might carry out prior to conducting the real endpoint assessment, so certainly an area to focus on. Not all of the portfolios cover all the KSBs, meaning learners fail to confirm their understanding. We do see a tendency for learners to go off topic, specifically with the most able. So sometimes where the most able have lots to say, we've got to remember that the maximum duration of the interview associated to that portfolio is 45 minutes. So the more they go on about it, the less time they've got to answer other questions. So making sure that they stay on task and that they don't go off topic. So the project generally performs well, and most apprentices are well prepared, have clearly carried out those mock practice presentations and are fully aware of the time limit. The report style document that we mentioned backs up the presentation, which backs up that presentation, often takes the form of a narrative. So these are the forms of improvement areas. So as to that narrative really goes through how the work's been carried out rather than addressing the required KSBs in the assessment plan. So it should be about how they've managed the various stages of the project process rather than the narrative. Some apprentices do struggle as the chosen project itself doesn't lend itself to evidencing the full KSBs. So that, with that in mind, please ensure that the project really has been fully scoped out to making sure that it'll generate the correct KSBs, the right type of evidence. We mentioned before about the importance really of discussing the project prior to starting it with the employer, training provider or college, and that's to make sure that it will create the correct kind of evidence that will map across accordingly. And apprentices, we've got to really remember that once the 15 minutes is up in that presentation, it must stop for consistency. Therefore, it's really imperative really that the apprentices are practicing the timings of their presentation in a mock. Okay, so recommendations from the report include ensuring that the apprentices have a copy of their portfolio available during that interview. It's very much a supportive mechanism. It can often prompt and help the apprentices refer to the specific examples during the interview. Mock presentations are key. They allow the apprentice to stick to that time limit of 15 minutes, gives them practice in answering the questions around their project. Even better really is a mock presentation that's carried out remotely. So getting the apprentices used to presenting online, that'll certainly help them when it comes to the real thing. To guide centres in preparing for the endpoint assessment day, we've got the customer guidance document, which you can see there, which I've screenshot, which relates to checking the systems prior to endpoint assessment, such as firewalls might be an issue, and making sure that the requirements to run our endpoint assessment software that they use, GoToMeeting, works on the platforms, on the computers or laptops that the apprentice is going to use. So well worth looking at that document, which is available on the website, to make sure that you can do a system check prior to endpoint assessment happening. That document is found on our website under the apprenticeship section, EPA service tab, and then in the documents library. So quality assurance. As Juicy mentioned previously, to ensure really that we offer that quality product and service which are fit for purpose, we do carry out our own quality assurance on many aspects, one of which is the question banks, like Juicy mentioned before, on the multiple choice exam. They need to be fit for purpose and they need to be current. So we frequently revisit the EPA question banks. You might see on occasion that some questions have been reworded just to basically ensure we're continuously improving the products. And just to let you know too that we've been audited as well. And although we can't go into the finer detail, the granular detail of what they found, we have had extremely positive report back since we've been audited. So to summarise then, AP03, the standards has not changed. The KSBs have not changed. This means then that it doesn't impact your on-programme delivery. The AP03 only impacts learners from the 10th of September 2020, where the actual evidence is assessed has now become clearer, but further granular details will be available in our March webinar. We as an EPAO will need to ensure that the weighting of the portfolio and project remains as equal as possible. otherwise we'll be heavily loading one side and not the other. So with regard to invigilation as well, it remains the responsibility of ourselves and any other EPAO to ensure that appropriate invigilation of that knowledge test is carried out. Again, we'll be giving out further details on this in our March webinar. The assessment plan is now graded differently, with all criteria now needed to be achieved for a pass in both the portfolio and the project, remembering alongside the knowledge test grading, which hasn't changed. So it's still a minimum of 30 out of 50 for a pass and a 40 out of 50 for a distinction. Now, remembering that there's no capping on AP03, and so if a resit or retake is required, a learner can still achieve a distinction if the evidence generated within that resit or retake has met all the distinction criteria and all the pass criteria. Now, what I'm going to do is pass you over to Laura, who's just going to do a couple of slides on our new platform, which will support you as customers from maybe now onwards, but definitely from February. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Dan. Can we just go on to the next slide? So if you haven't heard of the new EPA Pro platform, I'm pleased to inform you that if you're not already on it, then you will be moved onto it by the end of February, and you will be contacted by our EPA onboarding team to let you know when your transition date will be. But basically what we are doing is replacing the current EPA process where you work directly with our EPA team and walled garden, and we're moving on to a new platform, which is an end-to-end platform. So basically you'll be able to see the progress of your learners through EPA throughout this one system. Dom, could we just move on to the next slide and I'll go through the steps, please? Thank you. So the 8-stage journey that we've had for a while with the current EPA process will be changing shortly. So basically, when EPA Pro is introduced, you will move away from walled garden. You will make all registrations through EPA Pro. You'll upload gateway evidence, which moves into stage 4. All the declaration forms and everything will be on there for you to complete. A new step that we're introducing through EPA Pro is what we call an EPA planning meeting. So right after gateway, rather than the gateway being signed off and you having to wait for our EPA team to contact you to confirm a date, we will put in place an EPA planning meeting directly with the independent end assessor. So you'll have that early contact with the assessor, and you'll also agree a date with them at that meeting. So that will all be done directly through the assessor. That call is open for providers, employers and learners, so whoever you feel is relevant to be at that meeting. But a positive for the learner is that they get to meet their assessor right at the beginning of the EPA process. So that date will be confirmed on the system. Any assessment evidence, so showcase portfolios or projects, will all be uploaded onto EPA Pro, so we're losing the EPA portal. And then the EPA event will happen through the platform as well, and results and certification will go through as normal. The only part of walled garden that you will still need to use is for any Evolve online tests. So there will still need to be booked through walled garden, but everything else is done through EPA Pro. And as I mentioned previously, you will be able to see the full learner progress. So you'll be able to check where they are. You'll be able to start uploading evidence early if you've got it. You don't have to wait until they're assigned on the portal. As soon as the registration's made, you can start adding evidence for those learners. So hopefully you'll see that as a positive, that it's a fully transparent platform, which the feedback that we've had from centres about it that are using it so far is really, really positive. And if you've got any further questions, by all means contact myself or contact your own account manager and we'll be able to go through it with you in more detail. But if you've not been contacted so far by our team, if you contact EPA onboarding at cityandguilds.com with your centre details, they'll be able to tell you where you are in the transition. But the end of February is the deadline to get everybody onto the new platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so Obviously, we appreciate that times are difficult at the moment, so hence why we are here to help. If you customer services are available. If you need to contact customer services, please do use centre support at cityandguilds.com, or feel free to ring them. We've also got help centres. If you don't need to speak to customer service, we do have help centres documents under that particular that link there, where you'll find walled garden help, smart screen help, and specifically Evolve help, amongst other things. We've also got a dedicated business skills webpage. On there, you will find all information to do with business skills qualifications, apprenticeships, etc. But what you also find is upcoming and previous webinars. Now, we have talked an awful lot about the granular detail being more so in our March webinar, and we will update you there with a date. But what we recommend you do is jump onto that link, and you will find that that webpage, sorry, is where you would register for the March one. Not only that, but you will find other recordings that are available there. Some customer service practitioner ones, etc. Some frequently asked questions, specialist, customer service specialist, pre-recorded webinars as well. So well worth looking on that business skills webpage. If you want to get in contact with me, I know many of you do already, please feel free to email me on dominic.green@cityandguilds.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And of course, if you were told about this particular webinar by a colleague and you didn't receive an email update, then it might be worthwhile registering for updates on this link here. You can select your preferences, and you will then receive emails just around those particular preferences. If you want to update your preferences, if you've recently moved into a different subject area and you need to receive updates on other areas, then you can go on and update your preferences by filling out the form. Okay, so what we're going to ask now is that you do us a little bit of a favour, if possible, in order to get your feedback. Like I said previously at the very beginning, there will be a survey sent out to you by the end of the day, hopefully, along with the copy of the recording. It'll take you only a minute to fill out. It's probably only got about 5 questions off the top of my head. But what it does ask is, have you any learners that you've registered already since September 10, sorry, because obviously they will be on 9473-12, and we will need to get an idea of how many numbers of learners that we need to transfer across to 22. And if you haven't, then are you likely to register any before the new 9473-22 code kicks in mid-February? Again, it's about getting an idea of how many have been registered so that we can transfer them across as efficiently as possible. Make sure that you do sign up for the email updates if you wish to attend our more granular detail webinar in March 2021. We have had a provisional date, and so what I'll do is in the follow-up, I will, if it's confirmed in time, I will give you that date and update our website as well so that you can register as soon as possible. Okay, we appreciate that this has been a long time coming, this webinar, and there may be lots of questions. So if for those that have asked questions and typed them into the question banks, we'll now address these. If there's any that we can't answer because of the fine detail that's required, or we might need to go back to iFate or confirm the answer elsewhere, we will leave these till later just to give you the correct information. And we'll create a frequently asked questions sheet and put those up on the website. Okay, so 1 minute while I bring out the question bank. Okay, so there's a number of questions here. First question from Jill. Please, can we have some more sample knowledge tests? Yes, Jill, that's demand is there from many of the centres, not just your own. We are working on this, and as we update the question banks, we should hopefully be able to get another one out to you as a minimum. But please bear with us. We are working on this. Okay, there are a few questions on there about sound. We do apologise about that. Is it just me, or has everybody else lost sound? We apologise if the sound was quality, not very good quality. Not a great deal we could do about it. Unfortunately, we are all working from home, but please do bear with us. The recording will be sent out today, where hopefully we covered everything. Okay, Sarah has said, on current assessment plan, if a learner gets a distinction in their EPA knowledge test and distinction in their portfolio-based interview, but a pass in their project presentation, what is their overall score and why? So Sarah, we can't answer that at the moment because we don't know the breakdown of the scores. It is a possibility that it could be a pass, but there's a slight chance as well that there could be a distinction if the other two components were extremely high and pushed it over the average of 80%. But without knowing the individual scores, it's impossible to say. Okay. If the code has changed, do we need to get approval before registering? The answer is no. If you're currently running 947312 and you've got approval for that, then you will be okay. You don't need to get reapproval. Lara said, when is the third version of the assessment plan going to be made available on the IFA website? Do you know? I downloaded the third version from the website late last week again for a customer. So it was there last week. We are aware that they do tend to come down and go back up again. So if you keep checking, there should be a link to the AP03. When you do download it, make sure that you check in the top right hand corner what version it is that you are downloading, just to make sure that you are on the right one. Remembering that learners registered prior to 10th September won't require AP03 at all. They'll be requiring AP01. Will another knowledge test practice paper be issued? Yes, we are working on that at the moment, so that should be with us in the near future. Jessica has said, why has it changed to achieve a distinction in all areas to achieve an overall distinction? I'm confused about what the weighting means if you must still achieve distinction across the board. So this is a decision made by IFA, and that they've basically leveled out the playing field. So the knowledge test is now the same equivalent as to the project and the portfolio. And basically, on review, they have said that in order to achieve a distinction now, you must achieve a distinction across all areas. The weighting is 33.3% on each method of assessment. And it's essentially something that they've decided upon, and that you must achieve in all areas. We don't necessarily know why. We don't have any say in that, unfortunately.
Tom, there's a question from Susan, which I'll pick up if you want. It's around transferring learners who started their ILR before September 20th. Can they switch to the new version 3 plan if they've not been registered or gone through Gateway? The feedback from IFET around this is really the learners should complete the assessment plan that was live when they started. However, if they feel or you feel it would disadvantage the learner in any way, yes, you can transfer them across. Obviously, we'll be confirming the dates will be open for actual EPA. We're open for registrations from February, but we won't be open for actual EPA assessments on the new plan till towards September time, because obviously we need the guidance for you, and also we need to train the assessors on the new plan.
Thanks, Mandy. So, hi Jan. Jan said, at Gateway, does the project have to be finished at that point, or can the apprentice still be working on it? Jan, at Gateway, the portfolio and project must have both finished in order to successfully go through Gateway. So Elaine has said we use Teams. Is that okay, or should we familiarise our learners with Zoom as well? Elaine, for security purposes and for storing of the recordings, City and Guilds actually uses a platform called GoToMeeting, where we can record the endpoint assessment. Therefore, we don't actually use Teams or Zoom at all. However, what I would say is that when you carry out your mock project-based presentations, for example, and your mock portfolio interviews, just using anything online really gives the learner the same feel. And so you could use Teams or Zoom for your mock, but your real endpoint assessment for the apprentice will be done via GoToMeeting.
There was a question, Dom, I can't remember who said it actually, because it's further up, but it was around, does the knowledge test have to be completed first? Because of the current situation, they're not able to do it remotely. The answer to that is no. They could do the other parts of the EPA if they weren't able to do the knowledge test. However, you would need to make sure that, you know, obviously that the learner had done the mock tests, and, you know, because the knowledge will be a key part of it, so you wouldn't want to disadvantage the learners. But yes, we have had some recently where we've had to do, you know, the other components first due to the learners not being able to take the test.
Thanks, Mandy. Sharon said, does the 40 out of 50 to get a distinction apply to version 1.2? And she's referring to the knowledge test. Yes, that's right, Sharon. So in order for the learner to get distinction in that area, you require 40 out of 50 as well in both versions. There's no change there in the grading. So Elise said, there is no step for feedback, only if you appeal the results. Is there a plan to include this so learners can see where they've passed, achieved a distinction, etc.? Elise, that's quite right. That's something that will be implemented in the future using EPA Pro. And one of the reasons that we are transferring across to that particular platform. It won't happen straight away, but in the future there will be feedback on EPA Pro for presenters to access. So Christina, hi Christina, has said, if we have a full class of learners, 6 of them are going to be on the new assessment plan because of their start date, but 6 are on the old assessment plan. can because they started a few weeks earlier, can the older ones go on the assessment plan too? They can if you wish. If you feel that'll be more beneficial to you, then you can put them across to AP03 if you wish, that you're all the group is working towards the same assessment plan. Yeah, that's fine.
The question from Justin around the assessment plan states the interview should be submitted to the EPO a month prior to interview, no timescales given for the project report. No, you're right, it isn't very clear in there. However, it is a month in the assessment plan, but in our packs we do ask for the portfolio to come in 2 weeks prior to the EPA to give you a little bit more time there. But yes, we would expect the project report, because the project has to be completed by Gateway, and there is actually a declaration on the recording form. So the project report would come in at Gateway.
Liz has said, if we are delivering the diploma, remembering that there is a non-mandatory diploma available if anybody wants to run it, it's 3473, which does map across 100% to 9473. If we're delivering the diploma qualification as well, and assessing it against the assessment criteria for the diploma, can we use some of that evidence as for the endpoint assessment, bearing in mind it will have markings against the diploma, or shall we present clean evidence? So it used to be that it needed to be presented as clean evidence. Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are now accepting diploma evidence, even though it's marked. Is that correct?
We would, but we wouldn't encourage it. To be fair, it should be clean, because the assessor is looking at the evidence, not, obviously you've marked that and assessed that against the qualification, which is completely separate. So where possible, we would suggest it comes in as clean evidence. But like Dom said, we've not rejected any, if that did come in.
So Andrea has said, what is the difference between a resit and a retake? A retake basically requires further learning. Sharon has said, do we have to evidence the 21 to 35 hours on the project work? No, you don't at all. We don't ask for a tally sheet or anything like that. It's very much a case of the learner's evidence will generally give the IEPAs a picture of how big the project was. But if the project, as according to the assessment plan states, it must be between 21 to 35 working hours. We've also got to remember as well that what one learner can do in 21 hours might take another learner 35 hours. So it's very much an approximate, but where the learner can stick to between 21 and 35 hours, that is the requirement. Okay, it is 10:32. Apologies, we have overrun. There are lots and lots of questions, of which we need to sift through, some duplicates. However, what we will do is we will download these questions, get them answered as soon as possible, and upload them to the business skills page that I mentioned previously. And by the end of the day or tomorrow, there should be a new date up for the March webinar, providing our digital marketing team can update the website in time. Okay. Finally, thank you very much for your time today. We hope that we thank you for joining. We hope you can join us again in March, and feel free to follow City and Guilds Business on Twitter, as well as myself on LinkedIn. I do tend to post updates and events on there as well. And so until March, stay safe, and thanks again for joining today. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.